All right, so we've had 7 seals that have been opened. The 7th seal contained the 7 trumpets. And now we're into kind of sort of this, there's an intermission between 6th and 7th seals. There's been an intermission between 6th and 7th trumpet. And now there's going to be this lengthy kind of interlude after 7 before we get to the bowl judgments. So some have said chapter 12 is the most difficult chapter in the book of Revelation to understand. Others have said it's probably the easiest chapter, so there you go. I would lean towards the second view. Most of it seems pretty obvious to me, but there is one main question that arises, and so we'll talk about that here in the first few verses. So Revelation 12, it says, "A great sign appeared in heaven." In the Bible, signs are just that. They point to something. Sometimes you'll hear like signs and wonders. There are actually 3 words that are used in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, and all of them kind of go together. So a miracle is something that happens outside the normal order. Now I just want to talk about this for a minute because there are a lot of things we call miracles that are not. They're providence. Like you're at the right place at the right time, that's not miraculous, but that is still God at work. That's His providence making things all come together. And so, when someone has a baby, it's not a miracle, but it is God at work. We don't see God at work only in the miraculous. We see Him work in everything. And so a miracle, something else. Here's the way usually I try to show the difference between those. So we have a guy driving down a road. It's late at night. He's getting sleepy. And a bird flies in the window, hits him in the chest, and wakes him up so he avoids an accident. That's not a miracle. Birds fly. People go to sleep when they drive. Birds even sometimes fly in windows. That's God's providence that the bird came in his window at that time. That's God watching over that. That is just as much a work of God as the 10 plagues on Egypt. Same guy, same road, but his windows are rolled up and a bird appears inside the cab of his truck and hits him and wakes him up. That's a miracle. Birds don't just appear inside the cab of a truck. Both of those are equally the work of God. Both of those should equally lead us to worship and recognize God. But one is a miracle, the other is providence, God watching over and making creation work. And most of what God does is providence. Here's the way the New Testament puts it: in the fullness of time. Christ was born of a woman born under the law. At the right time, the world had come. Most of the known world was under the control of Rome, so you can move freely all over the empire. So the early church was able to spread rapidly. That is God's providence. And we can all you can give testimonies about God's providence and how God has been at work in your life. And so a lot of what we call miraculous really is providence. So miracles sometimes outside the natural order, like the Nile River turning to blood. That sort of thing. That's a miracle. A second term that's used, the word wonder, and it's something which shocks us, creates wonder in us. We recognize that it is something divine, typically is the way the word is used, recognition that God has done it. So we have something outside the normal order, something that inspires awe or wonder. That's, by the way, where the word awesome comes from, creates awe. The third one is the word sign. So when God, that creates wonder, does the miraculous outside the normal order, that is not to be done just to be done. It is done as a sign to point to something. In other words, in the Bible, rarely are miracles just done. They're done for a purpose, to point to something, typically to the message to be presented. So when he says he saw a great sign, it's something that brings awe, and all these words are interconnected. So this great sign appears in heaven. So he's get this vision of this thing. Now, I'll be honest with you, this is really bizarre. Here's why it's bizarre. The book of Revelation is a vision. So now he has a vision inside of his vision. So he says, I had a vision of having a vision. So that's just really interesting. So this great sign appears in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, the child is obviously Jesus, and we'll look at some of the details about that, but he's the one who was caught up to God and will rule the nations with a rod of iron. We'll see where that comes from in the Old Testament. The dragon is clearly Satan, and he pulls down a third of the stars. He has a third of the angels who rebel with him, what we now would call demons. But who in the world is the woman? Well, as you can imagine, there are a lot of different interpretations. Our Catholic friends universally accept this as Mary, because Mary is shining like the sun, the moon between her feet, and they basically almost deify Mary. She was without sin. Immaculate Conception does not refer to Jesus. It refers to Mary, who was born sinless, so that her offspring could be sinless. And so they have what's called Mariolatry. But there are a number of things that don't fit that scenario. Nowhere in the Bible is she ever presented as being impressive. She's always presented as being unimpressive, which is because that's the way God wanted to bring his son into the world, not impressively, but unimpressively. I mean, he's born in a barn, for crying out loud. So the Bible kind of goes out of its way to show that Mary was just a common girl. And so nowhere would we find her that. Another issue with it being Mary is we have no record of her running off into the wilderness for 1,260 days like that. A third issue is, if it's Mary, there's no reference to Joseph. And she actually did head to Egypt, not in the wilderness, but she did head to Egypt, but Joseph went with her. We don't know what happened to Joseph. He's never mentioned after Jesus' childhood, probably indicating that he had passed away when Jesus was young. So it's probably not Mary. Another popular interpretation is that it's the church. Now, this one has some real problems. The church did not give birth to Jesus. Jesus instituted the church. So it doesn't seem to be any connection to the church. So in all likelihood, probably the reference is to the nation of Israel. The 12 stars, of course, would represent the 12 tribes. The sun and the moon could represent... remember, Joseph has a dream, and he sees his brothers bow down. Then he sees not just them, but he sees also his mom and dad bow down. He sees the sun and the moon; they bowed down as well. So that may be a reference to that. Actually, nobody really knows for sure what that is, but it seems to be the nation of Israel. And then there are a couple other things here we'll see in a minute that would seem to verify that. So then we have another sign in heaven. So we have the woman first. Then we have this great red... What in the world is a red dragon? Well, it's interesting. Usually, the Bible calls them either angels or cherubim. And the cherubim are guardians. So when Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, who guards the entrance? A cherubim with a sword that turns in every direction. On top of the Ark of the Covenant, who protects God's presence? They have cherubim. They're actually in the veil of the temple, at the tabernacle in the temple, there are cherubim sewn into it to protect or to guard the throne room of God. So cherubim are like guardians. The other category that we actually ran into really once in Isaiah 6 are the seraphim. Now, the Hebrew word saraph means to burn or to be on fire. So the seraphim are the burning ones, and they have 6 wings. Remember, 2 they cover the face, 2 they cover the feet, and with 2 they fly. So the closest thing I can picture to a flying, flaming angel is some kind of dragon-like sort of deal. And so that's probably why he's defined as a red dragon, because Satan was an angel, or he still is an angel. He's a fallen angel, and so he may well have been one of these seraphim. By the way, the fact that he's red is one of the reasons why you always see Satan is red with the horns and the pitchfork and all that jazz. That comes more from Dante's Inferno than anything. But anyway, so we have this great red dragon, and then there are a host of interpretations of what in the world are the 7 heads and the 10 horns, and 10 horns is just really, this is bad math. If you have 7 heads, you have 7 horns, 1 apiece, or you have 14, 2 apiece, but 10 is like, okay, do we have like four that are missing one horn, or are the heads separate from the horns? The horns probably are separate because we have 7 heads and 7 diadems. There are 2 words for crown. One is the wreath that you would get if you won a contest, like in the Olympics, and that would fade away, of course. The other is what we think of as a crown, usually made out of metal and sometimes with stones in it. So these are those kind of crowns. And there have been all kinds of speculation, and here's where we have to be very, very careful, and here's where people, I think, just totally go wrong with the Bible. When I was young, the 10 horns were identified as Europe, and there would be a European confederation of 10 nations. And then when the European Union started, there were 9, so they thought there'll be one more, and then we'll have the 10, and then Jesus will come back. And there's now 23 in the European Union. And so trying to read prophecy in the Bible and always fitting our day is both correct, because I do believe Jesus can come back at any time, but it also can be very incorrect. We have to be very, very careful about interpreting the Bible by the newspaper. We've already seen that, like with the red thing flying across the sky. Well, that's got to be a nuclear missile. It's not like that. The 10 horns represent strength or power, but y'all know the numbers 7 and 10 are used a lot in the Bible to represent completion or filling out or fulfillment. So we have the 7 diadems, the 10 horns, and the 7 crowns. So this is a very powerful creature, and we're going to see a lot more of him here in a minute. And what all he does. So with his tail, he swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven. So about 1/3 of the angels revolted against God. It's really interesting. The Bible does not give us much about the origin of sin. It was just said that sin was found in Satan. It was the sin of pride. He wanted to take God's place. But that's it. There's not a lengthy discussion about where it come from. But boy, there sure is a lot of discussion about what it looks like. And how devastating and destructive it is. We have no idea when this happened, when Satan rebelled, but he takes 1/3 of the demons, a 1/3 of the angels with him, the demons, and they're cast out. So the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so when he bore her child, he might devour it. Satan did everything. Look, Satan didn't just wait until the birth of Jesus. Satan tried to cut off the messianic line numerous times. Athaliah tries to kill all the descendants of David, but we have one son that's hidden. There's an attempt to end the messianic line, obviously, with Haman in the book of Esther, and God again providentially preserves his people. When Jesus is born, what does Herod do? It's not the command to kill all the Hebrew children. And so, there's this constant attempt to stop what Jesus is going to do. So that's probably what's a reference here. But she gave birth to a male child. And Jesus, of course, is an Israelite. He comes from that line. One who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Now look at Psalm 2, because this phrase doesn't just come out of nowhere. Psalm 2 says, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed," it's the word Messiah, "saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heaven laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. He mocks them." So God laughs at them and mocks them. That verse makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Think about God mocking people. Let me just clarify. God never, ever, anywhere in the Bible, mocks people for something that is not in their control. So God doesn't mock somebody because they have a funny walk or because they stutter or anything like that. Never, ever, anywhere. God doesn't mock people for that. What he mocks them for is their rebellion against him, what they do. So I think that's important we recognize that distinction, and that we would do the same thing. Sometimes, if you're not going to cry, the only option is to laugh at some of the foolishness of the world. But we never laugh at people because of things that they can't help. That is nowhere biblical at all. So he mocks them because they want to throw off his rule. He will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I've set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I've begotten you, quoted numerous times in the New Testament. Verse 8, ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron and dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore be, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth, serve the Lord with fear, rejoice with trembling, kiss the Son, lest he be angry. And most translations say, and you perish in the way. Literally it is, and he blasts you off the road. I just wish we would translate it that way, because that just sounds so much better. Because his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. So he is going to, the nations are going to revolt, but their revolt is going to be destroyed. That's what it means to break them with a rod of iron. So he's quoting this right out of Psalm 2. But her child, because this ruling is not coming yet, was caught up to God and to his throne. So Jesus was here. Now watch how this works. The Old Testament predicts a Messiah who will die for us. Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, 52, 13 through 53, 12. The suffering servant and all of that. But it also predicts a coming king. Psalm 2, Psalm 110, maybe Isaiah 9, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and all that kind of stuff. So there are a whole bunch of that. But the New Testament, we understand, those two roles of Jesus are separated in time. So Jesus' ministry the first time was as a suffering servant for us. When he returns, he'll break the nations with a rod of iron and establish the throne of David in Jerusalem. So he's been caught up to God, so we're waiting for him to come back and do the second part of what he'll do as Messiah. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she's to be nourished for 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, so the last half of the tribulation. Now, where in the world is Israel going to be protected in the wilderness, and where is the wilderness? Well, Daniel chapter 11, verse 41 gives us the answer, I think. So Daniel 11:41, and it's talking about these assaults and everything on the people of Israel and all of that. Verse 41 says, not speaking of Jesus, but talking about the beast, he will come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall. But these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. Now, why those three? Okay, well, let's just take a look. Okay, it'll help us. There, that solved all that. So, so Israel is here. Here we have Moab, Ammon, and Moab. Edom are all over here, and I think I got a little more of a blow up here. So you'll see Ammon, Moab, and Edom. These three nations have been enemies of Israel throughout the Old Testament in particular. They are just constant enemies. So Edom actually means red, and it was Esau's alternative name. So it was founded to the descendants of Esau. So they are related, obviously, to Israel through Esau. And then Ammon and Moab. Ammon is an interesting term. It means of my people. Because remember, when Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed, who survives? Okay, Lot. And Mrs. Lot gets out of town, but she doesn't survive. She turns into a pillar of salt. And then who survives with Lot? His two daughters. Do they know if there's anybody else alive in the world? They've seen all the world they know completely destroyed. So they say, there's no man left to come unto us. Let's get pregnant by dad so that we can carry on the human line and we'll have children. So they get him drunk. The older daughter goes in and sleeps with him. Then they get him drunk again, and the younger daughter goes in and sleeps with him, and he's become pregnant. So, of my people means my child comes from my people, my dad. And actually the word Moab is Hebrew for from dad. So, you see the Ab, that's where we get Abraham, the AB, which is his father. And so these are also, by extension, related to Israel because Remember that Lot is Abraham's nephew and part of his family. So these nations over here are constant enemies, but notice they're out in the desert. They're in the wilderness over here. And so when it says, Daniel says that those nations will be spared, probably so that many of the Israelites can flee in that day. That's the wilderness that they flee to and are protected. God has prepared for them. Some go so far as to say it's the city of Petra. I'm not sure I want to nail it down to one particular city, but in all likelihood, this is what it's talking about. It's Ammon, Moab, and Edom, those three nations that were spared. Now we get kind of a longer description of Satan. So verse 7, now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. By the way, how many angels are named in the Bible? Do you know? 3. Okay, Michael, Gideon, and Lucifer. So you were thinking just good angels. I'm sorry, Gabriel, not Gideon. Gabriel, who's God's warrior, El Gabor. And so the Bible usually doesn't name them. It appears Michael is the top angel. Okay. There are some that believe that there were 3 angels assigned to each person of the Trinity. That Gabriel belongs to the Holy Spirit, Michael is the Father's, and that Lucifer actually was Jesus' appointed angel. I don't hold to that. There's no indication of that in the Bible, but some people think that's the case. And so we have the lead angel, Michael, and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated. And there was no longer any place for them in heaven. So this is going back to the sweeping down of the stars and everything. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, obviously reference to Genesis in the garden where he comes as a serpent, who's called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. Now, my goodness, look how many we have. He's called a dragon, a serpent, devil, Satan, deceiver. Okay? None of those are good terms. So we get the serpent one. That was the one in the wilderness. We've talked about the dragon. The word devil, the Greek word's diabolical. So if y'all remember any of those old, like Batman from the 60s, that diabolical schemes. And so the idea is of something that's diabolical is to be an accuser, to make false accusations, try to ruin somebody's reputation. The word Satan actually is a Hebrew word, Satan, and it means accuser. So in Job, he's called Hasatan, the Satan, the accuser, and he accuses Job of not really being faithful. And so to try to ruin his reputation. So he is a dragon, great power, but he's also a snake, and he is someone who is trying to ruin the reputation of God and his people, and he is a deceiver. He's an angel of light who deceives and misleads many. It's okay. Just one snort of crack. It's okay. It's no big deal. You're really in love with him. Go ahead. It's all right because in your love it makes it okay. I mean, he's always deceiving people. He is a deceiver. He even attempted to deceive Jesus. Man, we'll turn these stones into bread. I mean, if you bow down and worship me, you don't have to die on the cross. I'll just give you the world right now. We can jump right on down the millennium and we can skip all the difficult part. I mean, that's what he does. He's a deceiver. So he is thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser, there we go back to that idea of devil and Satan, the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down. He accuses them day and night before our God. So this is a great rejoicing that, Satan will be defeated. And I just want to drop in right here so that we understand. Satan has never been God's equal, never will be. This is not a fair fight. Which is good. The outcome is never in question. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Now y'all are aware that this is not right. You don't win by being defeated. And yet we win because Jesus was defeated when they crucified him. And we win when we lose our own lives. That's what he said, they gave up their own lives. This is the way God always does it. It's always backwards like that. What's the way to win? You give up. So what's the way to stop anger? You answer it with a soft word, according to Proverbs. Or you turn the other cheek, according to the Sermon on the Mount. So it's just interesting. We conquered him. Jesus won by losing. He allowed them to arrest him. He allowed them to have a mockery of a trial. He allowed them to beat him. He allowed them to put the crown of thorns on his head. He allowed them to crucify him. Jesus went like a lamb to the slaughter who did not open his mouth. So our victory comes really from Jesus' defeat. Now, of course, in the end, that defeat is turned into the ultimate victory. But this is kind of the way that God, God just doesn't do it like we would do it. And they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. He has 1,260 days. He has 3.5 years to pour out all of his anger and vitriol, everything that he can, because then it's going to be the end of him, and he knows it. I guess to me, this is one of the most astounding. I realize that there's no indication that angels can be saved, converted. But if you know you're going to lose, you know that the end is here, you know that you don't stand a chance, and you still go ahead and do it, it's almost mind-boggling, is it not? I mean, it's not like the devil's like, guys, we got a chance. Let's rally, gets all the demons in the huddle, and say, everybody on 5, win, 1, 2, 3, win. I mean, it's not like that. I mean, he knows he's going to lose. And it's almost like being a 16 seed versus a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. No 16 seed has ever beat a number 1 seed. I mean, it's like, you go in the game, and I know what the coach says, hey, there's a first time for everything. No, there's not. There'll never be a first time that Satan beats God. It's not going to happen. So he knows it, and so he's really angry because he knows that his days of being a devil and a deceiver and accuser are about to come to an end. So verse 13, when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child, but the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, over into Ammon and Moab, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time, 3.5 years, so time, and then 2 more is 3, and the half is 3.5. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Obviously, there's a great deal of imagery here, but the point's very clear because it's like a river, so it's not a river. That's why I use the word like. But you see this battle going on between Satan and, Israel, and he hates him. He's hated him from the get-go. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. So he just kill everybody. On those, and here's how the offspring are described, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Remember that Christianity was birthed from the Jews. All the first Christians were Jews. All the apostles were Jews. And so, that's where our history comes from. Those who keep the commandments, but he expands it here now, of course, to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. Now that's going to be significant. So we have him standing on the sand. So we have Satan. So let's keep him in mind, because now we're going to run into 2 more characters in chapter 13. And I saw a beast. The beast shows up about 36 times in Revelation. He was mentioned back in chapter 11 once, kind of a precursor. Now we're going to get to see what he's like. So why is it a beast? Well, back to Daniel, chapter 7, verse 7. He didn't just pull this imagery from nowhere. So in Daniel 7:7, he says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns, 10 signs of power. So that's probably why it's a beast. So we get this beast rising up out of the sea. So notice that he has 10 horns and 7 heads. So some have connected him to the dragon, but probably not, and I'll show you why. He has 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. This is a non-existent animal. John has no way to describe it. So he just pulls out things people are familiar with. That's why he keeps saying it's like a leopard, and its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. I don't know if leopard, and then people come with a host of ideas. Different nations identify with leopards and bears and lions, and well, leopard shows that he's swift, and and the feet like a bear show that he's really strong and powerful, and a lion. I don't know that all that is essential. All of these are animals that are big and ferocious enough to destroy a human being. So he doesn't pick doves and quail and lizards and that sort of thing. So probably the idea is not the emphasis on the way the beast looks, but on the fear and the strength and the power, because these are the ones he chooses. It's been, I don't know, a few years ago, Jerry and I were at a zoo or something. I don't even remember where we were, but we'd gone in like the winter section. We have like the penguins behind the glass, and they keep it cold in there, and you watch the penguins for a while, and at some point you think, why am I watching them just waddle around in there? But anyway, but then we go around the corner, and they had a polar bear. Of course, he's behind glass, and he just happened to be up next to the window. So I did what everybody else in the whole wide world does. Take a picture of me in front of the bear, so like we get his picture. That's not that big deal until I look down. I'm telling you, the feet were huge. I've never been that close to a live bear. I mean, I've seen stuffed ones, but it's like right on the other side of the glass. And I thought, one swipe and I'm done. I mean, it was really impressive how huge it was. I thought, man, I would not want to meet this thing in the wilderness alone. And he was angry or hungry, either one. Now, if I met him with somebody else, all I would have to do is outrun them. But so that he's this, and so and here in a minute I'll talk about why I don't think he's the dragon and why I think he is, but who I think he is and his purpose. So to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. So we have Satan, who's the dragon, and now he gives power and authority and everything to this beast. But the beast is his representative to the world. So that's why he has 7 heads and 10 horns. He is the representative, so he's to look like, so to speak, Satan to the world. Okay? Who is God's ultimate representative to the world? Jesus. Matter of fact, Jesus said, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Okay? So the beast is the Antichrist. So we have the Father and his representative of the world, Jesus. We have Satan, the dragon, and his representative to the world is the beast. He's mimicking God because he wants to be God. And so he gives this beast this power and authority. And the beast is going to be a human being. That's why I don't think this is a description of how he looks, but to show us ferocity and power. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound. Now, mortal means deadly. So basically, he's had his head smacked wide open and he's died. But his mortal wound was healed. Now, who does that sound like? Do you know anybody who had a mortal wound and came back to life? Jesus, very good. If you don't know the answer in church, start with Jesus and work from there. And once again, just like in Sunday school, that is the correct answer. Because the beast is the imitation of Jesus. So Satan is recreating what God has done through Christ. So we have a mortal wound and he is healed, and people marvel at that. Matter of fact, notice what it says, the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, just like we worship God because of what we've seen Jesus do. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? So they have found their great leader and hero, and they think they can go to Vegas and put everything that they have and everything that they are on the beast because he's a guaranteed win, and they're going to lose. So verse 5, and the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words. And it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. There's our 3.5 years, so we're at the midpoint of the tribulation to the end now. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling. That is, those who dwell in heaven. So hatred for God, hatred for the things of God, and hatred for angels in heaven and golden streets and the whole 9 yards. Also is allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them for 3.5 years. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. So basically there's going to be one world ruler. And everyone will follow him because they saw him die and come back to life. And he has all this power and authority and everything else. It is interesting that it says tribe, people, language, and nation. Because when we're into heaven, we're going to worship Jesus for redeeming us from every tribe, tongue, people. And I mean, he uses the same, similar kind of stuff because he's trying to imitate who Jesus is. And all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. So here we have it again. Our conquering, our victory is through the Lamb who was slain. So these are all the world, the non-believers. A lot of different terms are used in the Bible. The world's just kind of one that he likes to use, particularly in Revelation. So we have all the lost who are, they are thrilled with him, but not the believers. The believers are not. Now, verse 9 is very interesting. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. Why is that interesting? We've seen this statement about 7 times before. The early chapters of Revelation, as he gives a message to each church, he says, close to this. But he says, he that has an ear, let the churches plural hear. So the message isn't for each of the 7 churches, it's for all 7 of them, even though they're specifically directed to each. Here he goes, to anyone, not to the church. The reason is because at the beginning of the tribulation, the church has been raptured out, so the church is not here right now. That's why he changes it to anyone rather than church, and that happens, of course, in chapter 4, where he shifts gears. If anyone is, he just drops into poetry here. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with a sword he must be slain. Here's a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. I'll be honest with you, I don't want to be taken captive, and I don't want to be executed with a sword. Matter of fact, I'll be honest with you, I really don't want to be executed with anything. I don't get a gun or, gas or whatever it is. If I don't live long enough to experience the rapture, I would really like to preach and go home and eat, roll back in the recliner, and wake up in heaven. That'd kind of be my preference if I could write my own script, but of course God's the one who writes it. But notice what he says. He says, if this is what happens, then endure it, stay with it. That's why he says here's a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. I find this verse very fascinating. How many of you have ever talked to yourself? And don't be lying. Everybody talks to themselves. I like to talk to myself because it's really a great conversation. Because it's like the only conversation, it's the only person I can ever talk to that I totally agree with. If you ever find yourself arguing with yourself, now we might have some issues. Plus that I'm an out loud thinker, so I think better when I'm thinking out loud. But here, in a sense, John is talking to himself. Where is he writing the book of Revelation from? And why is he on the island of Patmos? It's not a resort island. It's more like Alcatraz than Hawaii. And so he has been taken captive. And so it's not just, now look out there, if y'all get taken into captivity, but we'll pray for you. If you get executed, way to go, way to stay faithful. But he has been taken captive. He knows that it is very possible and even likely under the Roman rule that he is also going to be executed. So he's not just calling others to endurance, but I think he's also to himself to stay faithful. He gets this vision. This vision should call him then to endurance and faith. So, whatever it is that comes, we are to remain faithful. And I'll be honest with you. In some ways, it's actually easier to be faithful when you're persecuted. because you have to make a clear call one way or the other. It's when things are good and easy that sometimes it's difficult to stay committed to Christ because things are good and easy. One of my professors used to say, as Christians, we can handle the difficult times. It's called prayer. It's the good times that we seem to struggle with. And unfortunately, there's a lot of truth to that. So here's a call. He just kind of drops that in. Now we get another beast. Verse 11, then I saw another beast. And then in chapter 16, verse 13, I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So we have Satan's the dragon. The beast is the Antichrist. But with God, we have the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Okay? So if Satan wants to imitate God, we have the dragon, Satan. We have Antichrist, the beast, who has a mortal wound and is healed. But what about the Holy Spirit? Well, that's this second beast we find in verse 11. I see another beast or false prophet rising out of the earth. So he's standing on the seashore. A beast comes out of the sea and a beast comes out of the earth. So you see these two. So he's standing there to see both. And that's why he's standing on the seashore, the dragon. It had two horns like a lamb and it spoke like a dragon. So maybe he's not as powerful as the beast. I don't know because he only has two horns. But anyway, he speaks like a dragon. So he's going to do the same thing. He's going to be given authority and power and represent him. So it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence. So Jesus gives us the Comforter. He says, I go away so that the Comforter may come and all that sort of thing. It makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. So what is the primary responsibility of the Holy Spirit? Point people to Jesus. Exactly right. I mean, that's it. I mean, he does a lot of other things. He does a lot of things, but that's the primary responsibility. So just like the Holy Spirit pointing things to Christ, the false prophet will point to Antichrist. It's the exact same thing because Satan wants to create this unholy trinity, so to speak, whose mortal wound was healed. So verse 13, this second beast, performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. So he does all this impressive stuff, and people are going to be deceived by all of these things. It's amazing how easily people are deceived. How easily they are misled. TBN is full of those kind of preachers. So verse 14, and by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Okay? Now, why is he saying to make an image? Of all the sins in the Bible, what's the one that is condemned far and away the most? Idolatry. This is the one. Worship anything but God. And so he said we're going to make this image. By the way, one of the reasons why idolatry is so difficult historically and even for us is because we're made out of physical stuff. I mean, if I ask you, describe so-and-so, usually we start with a physical description. Like there's been a crime committed. Could you describe the suspect? Oh, he had a deep voice. Like nobody says that. Like they give, height, approximate weight, skin color. I always like this hair color, but there's no box to check none. But they're like eye color. What would they wear? In other words, when we think about a description, we typically think of a physical description. There's nothing wrong with that. God made us physical. He created us as physical beings. But because of that, there is a temptation then to worship something that we can see and touch, something that is physical like we are. So there's always that temptation. So it makes it easier. Hey, well, there he is, this image, so we can celebrate and worship this beast. But then look at what it says, verse 15. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. So we have a speaking idol. And that will just so impress people to be convinced that this must be, even though I might not use the word Messiah, a messianic figure. Also it causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave. So it just gives opposite kind of categories. And you can put 100 other categories in there, educated, uneducated, or whatever, but everyone, all representative, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. Here we go. We get to the verses that a lot of people know are somewhere in the Bible, but not here. So that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666 or 666. So let's go back and just talk about a couple things before we deal with what in the world this number is and what it's not. So why marked on the right hand or the forehead? It was not uncommon in the Roman Empire to brand slaves. Interestingly enough, there were lots of different categories of slaves. Some categories actually were voluntary. There is no word in the Old or New Testament for employee. And so oftentimes the word servant or slave is used. So we have to know by context. When we hear slavery, what do we think of? Man, we've all seen Gone with the Wind. Or Roots. I can remember when the first Roots came out in, late 70s or whenever it was. And they had riots in my hometown and they closed the schools and all kinds of just craziness that I never really understood. But I was a teenage boy. Teenage boys don't understand a lot, so I kind of, But that's what we think of. We think of capturing somebody in Africa, bringing them across on a ship, and then selling them. Sometimes there is that in the Bible, but most of the time, servant or slave is the idea of more like what we think of like an employee, someone that's committed themselves. There's an economic arrangement. Sometimes it was you borrowed money and then you went as their slave to work it off, unless you are a teenage boy, in which case your dad used you as free labor, my dad certainly bought into that idea about teenage boys. But this branding is not economic, nor is it voluntary, or I'm just paying off a little debt that I owe or that sort of thing. This was captured, typically in war, and branded as my property. So this is what we would think of as slavery, which the Bible does not approve of, ever somebody owning somebody else. So they would be marked as belonging to someone. Well, you can see why he pulls out that image, because they understood what it means to mark, show I belong to somebody. So their mark shows they belong to the beast. And no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, now watch this, the name of the beast or the number of its name. So it's not just a number. It could also be the name, Antichrist, tattooed on your forehead. Probably, there's a lot of questions as to whether or not they're literally going to be marked this way, or he's just using this imagery that was familiar from the Roman Empire and saying unless you belong to the beast, you cannot buy or sell. So that's why in verse 18 it says, this calls for wisdom. I just want understanding. Calculate the number of the beast. Now, 666 is what kind of number? Okay, I'm going to give you a little hint. It's always good to let the Bible explain something to us. So look in verse 18. The number 666 is what kind of number? It's what? The number of a man. I know it's an even number and all that. It's the number of a man. So the Bible defines 666 for us. And there were people that, I can remember when Ronald Reagan got elected president, Ronald has 6 letters. Reagan has 6 letters, and his middle name's something that has 6 letters as well. And I remember, what was it? Wilson. Yeah, Ronald Wilson Reagan. All 3 names are 6 letters. So obviously, he's the beast, the Antichrist, because it's 666. And I mean, it's just astounding how, people try to apply this, come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. Some people think it's a social security number. Some people think that it's a barcode and you're actually going to be tattooed on your forehead with a barcode. Some people think that it's a GPS chip that's going to be embedded in your forehand and you'll now that I could see happening. You go in the store and you just, wave your hand in front of the little reader and it deducts it from your checking account, or it says, sorry, you have to put back 3 items. You don't have enough in your checking account, however that works. But that's trying to find what this is not. This is not about people being numbered. This is about people who have been marked not by God as belonging to him, but by a man, the beast, the Antichrist, as belonging to him. So the key to understanding the number 666 is not trying to figure out, I don't want to have a social security number because that's the mark of the beast. No, it's not. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about you've been marked as belonging to this person. And so those who are the saints do not take that mark because they recognize we belong to God, not to the Antichrist, not to the beast. So why then do we have his number as 666? Well, let's think this through. What are some important Bible numbers? 7, 10, 12, 40, 3, yes, 3, as in God is 3 and 1. And so 666 it's not really 666. It really is 666 because 6 falls short of 7. And so the idea is that human beings will always fall short. We're never going to be in and of ourselves anywhere close to God. So his number it's a human number. It's the number of a human being, and it falls short. It is not equal to God, because what does the beast want to be? Equal to God, or equal to Christ, because Satan wants to be equal to the Father, and the second beast, the false prophet, wants to be equal to the Holy Spirit. So we have this ungodly, false Trinity, and people are going to worship that rather than worship the true God, and they are willing to take his mark. By extension, you and I have been marked by God. We have been marked as his, that we belong to him. Now, in terms of marking, I have a better picture I like that also comes from the Bible. They would take their sheep and run them down through a chute so only one could go through at a time, and they would count them. One is called passing under the rod. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And when the 10th one would come through, they would just touch the rod onto its back, and there was paint on the rod, and it would mark the sheep. And those are the ones that were marked for God, because you were supposed to give 10%. You didn't go through and pick out the 10 best or the 10 worst, or that you just picked one out of every 10 that you would give. And so they would mark them. And I like that picture. But it's like this one, I've been marked as who I belong to. Of course, I belong not to the Antichrist, but to the real Christ, and have the real Holy Spirit. But this chapter, to me, is pretty easy to understand. We have Satan, Antichrist, false prophet, who are an attempt to equal the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. But as in everything Satan does, comes up short. Now, I just want to close with this, because this has absolutely nothing to do with this, but it has everything to do with this. Okay? I don't gamble, because I have a very risk-taking kind of personality. If I ever started gambling, I don't think I'd ever be an alcoholic or drug addict, but I could very easily become a gambling addict. I know that, just my personality, so I just totally stay away from anything like that. But I do know this: if you drop now I guess you swipe your credit card or whatever, but when you pull the arm or press the button, it comes up 3 cherries. That's pretty good. But it can also come up 777. Do y'all not find that fascinating? That even Las Vegas recognizes that 777 is a winner. 666 isn't a winner on the machine. 777. That has nothing to do with this, but it kind of does as well. So I thought I would just leave you with that thought tonight to go home and resonate on. The pastor told us if we pull the one-armed bandit, we win if it's biblical. Give 10%. That's right. Oh, man. All right, y'all have a great evening.